Jasper McKinnon pulled his dusty hat low over his weathered face as he rode into the small town of Cedar Ridge. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth, and his horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. He had been traveling for 3 days straight, and exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders. All he wanted was a hot meal, a cold drink, and a bed for the night. The town looked typical for this part of Texas, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, and what appeared to be a small church at the far end. Nothing special, nothing that would make a man want to stay longer than necessary. Jasper had seen dozens of towns just like this one during his years as a cattle rancher. Moving herds from one place to another, he tied his horse to the post outside the saloon and pushed through the swinging doors. The interior was dimly lit, with a few locals nursing their drinks at scattered tables. Behind the bar stood a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, polishing a glass with a worn cloth. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, stranger," the bartender said with a friendly nod. "Name's Samuel Fletcher. What can I get you?" "Jasper McKinnon," he replied, settling onto a bar stool. "Whiskey, if you have it. And maybe some information about lodging for the night." Samuel poured the amber liquid and slid the glass across the bar. "You're in luck. We've got a boarding house just down the street. Mrs. Whitmore runs it, and she serves the best meals this side of Austin." He paused, studying Jasper's travel-worn appearance. "You passing through, or looking to stay a while?" "Just passing through," Jasper said, taking a sip of the whiskey. "I'm heading to San Antonio to meet with some cattle buyers. Should be gone by tomorrow morning." "Well, you've picked a good time to stop. Tomorrow's Saturday, and we're having our monthly town social. Nothing fancy, just some music and dancing in the church hall. Good food, too." Samuel's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Of course, the main attraction is usually watching the single folks try to pair up. We've got some real beauties in this town." Jasper wasn't particularly interested in socializing, but he nodded politely. He had learned long ago that staying on good terms with locals made traveling easier. "Sounds nice," he said, finishing his drink. As he prepared to leave, Samuel leaned forward, conspiratorially. "If you do decide to stay for the social, you might want to keep an eye out for Evangeline Hartwell. She's new in town, came here about 6 months ago to help her aunt run the dress shop. Real quiet girl, keeps to herself mostly, not much of a social butterfly then?" Jasper asked, only half interested. Samuel chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. She's probably the plainest girl you ever did see. Mousy brown hair, always pulled back tight. Wears those simple gray dresses that hide everything. Real bookish type. Always got her nose in some novel or poetry book. Most of the men in town barely notice her, which is fine by her, I think." Jasper stood and placed a few coins on the bar. "Well, I appreciate the information, Samuel. I'll see about that boarding house." As he walked down the dusty street toward Mrs. Whitmore's establishment, Jasper found himself thinking about the bartender's description of the mysterious Evangeline. He had met plenty of women during his travels, some beautiful, some plain, some bold, some shy. But there was something about Samuel's description that stuck with him. Maybe it was the way the man had described her as keeping to herself. Or perhaps it was simply curiosity about someone who seemed so different from the usual town social. Butterflies, Mrs. Whitmore's. Boarding house was a 2-story white building with blue shutters and a welcoming front porch. The elderly proprietor greeted him warmly and showed him to a clean, comfortable room on the 2nd floor. After washing up and changing into his one good shirt, Jasper found himself drawn to the window that overlooked the main street. The town was coming alive as evening approached. People were walking toward the church hall carrying covered dishes and musical instruments. Lanterns were being lit, casting a warm glow over the scene. Despite his initial intention to retire early and leave at dawn, Jasper felt a pull toward the festivities below. He had spent so many months alone on the trail, sleeping under stars and talking only to his horse and the cattle. The sound of laughter and music drifting up from the street made him realize how much he missed human companionship. Perhaps one evening of socializing wouldn't hurt as he made his way toward the church hall. Jasper caught glimpses of the townspeople through the windows. He saw couples dancing, children running around with plates of food, and groups of men discussing business near the refreshment table. The scene was wholesome and inviting, reminding him of the community gatherings from his own childhood back in Oklahoma. Just as he reached the church steps, he heard Samuel Fletcher's voice calling his name. The bartender approached with a wide smile, accompanied by a woman who could only be his wife. "Jasper. I'm glad you decided to join us," Samuel said heartily. "This is my wife, Martha." "Martha, this is the traveler I was telling you about." Martha Fletcher was a plump, cheerful woman with graying hair and a warm smile. "Welcome to our little gathering, Mr. McKinnon. I do hope you'll find our hospitality to your liking." "I'm sure I will." "Ma'am," Jasper replied, tipping his hat politely as they entered the hall together. Samuel leaned close to Jasper's ear. "Remember what I told you about Evangeline Hartwell? She's here tonight, sitting over by the windows with her aunt, the one in the gray dress with the book in her lap." Jasper followed Samuel's gaze across the crowded room, expecting to see exactly what the bartender had described, a plain, unremarkable woman who blended into the background. But as his eyes found the figure by the windows, he felt his breath catch in his throat. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw next, and his entire world was about to change forever. The woman sitting by the window was nothing like Samuel had described. Far from plain, Evangeline Hartwell possessed a quiet elegance that took Jasper's breath away. Her hair wasn't mousy brown at all. It was rich chestnut with hints of copper that caught the lamplight. Though pulled back in a simple style, soft tendrils had escaped to frame her face, giving her an almost ethereal quality. Her dress was indeed gray, but it was made of fine wool that complemented her creamy complexion perfectly. The simple cut couldn't hide her graceful posture or the gentle curves of her figure, but it was her eyes that truly captivated Jasper. Even from across the room, he could see they were a striking shade of green, like emeralds in sunlight, and they held an intelligence and depth that spoke of a rich inner life. She was reading, just as Samuel had mentioned, but there was nothing bookish or stern about her expression. Instead, she seemed transported by whatever story held her attention, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Occasionally, she would look up to observe the dancing couples, or laugh softly at the children's antics. And each time she did, Jasper felt his heart skip a beat. "That's her," Samuel whispered, clearly not noticing Jasper's stunned reaction. "Plain as day, like I told you. Real shame, too. She's got a good heart, helps out at the school sometimes, teaches the children to read. But the men around here prefer their women with a bit more flash, if you know what I mean." Jasper could barely hear Samuel's words. He was completely mesmerized by Evangeline, wondering how the entire town could be so blind. She was without a doubt the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but her beauty went beyond the physical. There was something about the way she held herself, the gentle way she interacted with the few people who approached her. That spoke of genuine kindness and grace. "I think I'll get some of that punch," Jasper managed to say, his voice slightly hoarse. The refreshment table was strategically positioned near where Evangeline sat with her aunt, a stern-looking woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. As Jasper ladled punch into a glass, he found himself stealing glances at the younger woman, trying to understand how she could be so overlooked. Her aunt noticed his approach first. "Good evening, young man," she said crisply. "I'm Adelaide Thornton, and this is my niece, Evangeline Hartwell." Evangeline looked up from her book, and when their eyes met, Jasper felt as though the entire room had fallen silent. Her gaze was direct and unafraid, holding his with a quiet confidence that made his pulse race. "Good evening," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent that hinted at education and refinement. "You must be the traveler Mr. Fletcher mentioned. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Jasper McKinnon." "Ma'am," he managed, removing his hat and feeling suddenly self-conscious about his rough appearance. "The pleasure is entirely mine." Adelaide Thornton studied him with sharp eyes. "Mr. McKinnon, are you by any chance related to the McKinnons who ranch near Abilene?" "I believe I knew a family by that name years ago." "Yes, ma'am." "That would be my uncle's spread. I have my own smaller operation now, mostly moving cattle between ranches and towns." Jasper was grateful for the conversation, as it gave him a reason to linger near Evangeline. "How fascinating," Evangeline said. closing her book, but keeping her finger between the pages to mark her place. "I imagine you see quite a bit of the country in your work. It must be wonderful to travel so freely." There was something wistful in her tone that caught Jasper's attention. "It has its rewards," he said carefully, "but it can be lonely too. Sometimes. I think I'd trade all the open road for a place to call home and good company to share it with." A faint blush colored Evangeline's cheeks. She looked down at her book. "I suppose we all dream of something different from what we have," she murmured. Before Jasper could respond, a young man with slick-back hair and an expensive suit approached their group. "Miss Evangeline," he said with an exaggerated bow. "Surely you're not going to spend the entire evening reading? The musicians have struck up a waltz." Evangeline's expression grew polite but distant. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Preston, but I'm quite content where I am." Preston's face reddened slightly. "Come now, don't be such a wallflower. Even a plain girl should know how to enjoy herself at a social gathering." Jasper felt anger surge through him at the young man's crude words. He was about to step forward when Evangeline spoke, her voice calm and steady despite the insult. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Preston, but I assure you I am enjoying myself perfectly well." Her tone was gracious but firm, effectively dismissing him without causing a scene. Preston huffed and walked away, muttering something about peculiar women under his breath. Adelaide Thornton's face had hardened during the exchange, but Evangeline seemed unaffected, simply returning her attention to her book as though nothing had happened. "That was well handled," Jasper said quietly. Impressed by her composure, Evangeline glanced up with a small smile. "Mr. Preston means well, I suppose. He simply doesn't understand that not everyone finds the same things entertaining." "And what do you find entertaining, Miss Hartwell?" Jasper asked, genuinely curious. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Books, certainly. Poetry, especially. I love stories about faraway places and different ways of life. I enjoy teaching the children at school. There's something magical about watching a child discover they can read a whole sentence by themselves." She paused, looking almost embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. "I suppose that sounds terribly dull to someone who actually travels and sees the world." "Not dull at all," Jasper said earnestly. "In fact, it sounds wonderful. I never learned to appreciate books the way I should have. Too eager to get out and see things firsthand, I suppose?" "There's nothing wrong with that," Evangeline replied. "We all learn in different ways. Some people need to experience things directly, while others prefer to explore through stories and imagination." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of violins beginning a new tune. Couples moved on to the makeshift dance floor, and the atmosphere in the room became more festive. Jasper watched Evangeline's face as she observed the dancers, noting the longing that flickered briefly in her green eyes. "Miss Hartwell," he said suddenly, surprising himself with his boldness, "would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" Both Evangeline and her aunt looked startled by the request. Adelaide Thornton frowned disapprovingly, but Evangeline's expression was unreadable. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Mr. McKinnon?" she said softly. "Neither am I," he admitted with a smile. "But I think we could manage not to embarrass ourselves too badly." For a long moment, Evangeline studied his face as though trying to determine his motives. Finally, she set her book aside and stood gracefully. "Very well, Mr. McKinnon, I accept your invitation." As Jasper led Evangeline onto the dance floor, he was acutely aware of the curious stares from other townspeople. He could hear whispered conversations and see raised eyebrows, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the woman in his arms. Moving gracefully to the gentle melody of the waltz, Evangeline had understated her dancing abilities. She moved with natural elegance, following his lead effortlessly, despite his own rusty skills. Her hand was soft in his, and he caught the faint scent of lavender in her hair. When she looked up at him, her green eyes held a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't quite identify. "You're an excellent dancer, Miss Hartwell," he said as they swayed to the music. "As are you, Mr. McKinnon, though I suspect you're being far too generous in your assessment of my abilities." She smiled. and Jasper felt his heart race at the transformation it brought to her face. "I'm a man who speaks his mind, ma'am. I don't believe in false flattery." He paused, then added quietly, "I also don't believe in letting beautiful women sit alone at social gatherings." Evangeline's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away. "You needn't say such things, Mr. McKinnon. I'm quite aware of how I appear to others." "Are you?" he asked gently. "Because I don't think you see yourself clearly at all." Before she could respond, the music ended, and reluctantly they separated. As they walked back toward her aunt, Jasper noticed how Evangeline seemed to withdraw into herself again, her shoulders curving slightly inward, as though she were trying to become invisible. Adelaide. Thornton watched their approach with a stern expression. "Evangeline, perhaps it's time we were heading home?" "It's getting quite late, of course." "And Adelaide?" Evangeline retrieved her book and shawl, then turned to Jasper with a polite smile. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. McKinnon. I hope your journey to San Antonio goes well." "Actually," Jasper said impulsively, "I was thinking of staying in Cedar Ridge for a few more days. No real hurry to reach San Antonio, and this seems like a pleasant town." Adelaide Thornton's frown deepened, but Evangeline's eyes widened slightly with what might have been pleasure. "How nice," she said softly. "I'm sure you'll find plenty to occupy your time here." As the two women prepared to leave, Jasper made a quick decision. "Miss Hartwell, I was wondering if you might recommend some books for me to read during my stay. You mentioned your love of literature, and I'd value your suggestions." Evangeline's face brightened immediately. "Certainly. I'd be happy to help. The general store has a small selection, and I have several books you might enjoy. Perhaps you could stop by the dress shop tomorrow afternoon. I help my aunt there on Saturdays." "I'll be there," Jasper promised, ignoring Adelaide Thornton's disapproving glare. After the women left, Jasper found himself surrounded by curious townspeople, eager to learn about the stranger who had danced with the plane. "Evangeline Hartwell. Don't know what you see in that girl," said a man named Harlan Walsh, slapping Jasper on the back. "She's odd, that one. Always reading, never joins in with the other ladies. My wife says she acts like she thinks she's better than everyone else. Maybe she just has different interests," Jasper replied, keeping his tone neutral despite his irritation. "Different interests?" laughed Preston, the young man who had been rude to Evangeline earlier. "Try a different planet. That girl lives in her books instead of the real world. No man wants a wife who'd rather read poetry than cook dinner or tend children." Jasper's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Some men might appreciate a woman with intelligence and education." "Intelligence?" Preston snorted. "What good is intelligence in a woman? My mother always said a pretty face and a cheerful disposition are worth more than all the book learning in the world. Give me someone like Rebecca Miller over there. Now that's what I call a real woman." Jasper followed, Preston's gaze to a blonde woman in a bright blue dress who was laughing loudly at something one of the men had said. She was certainly pretty in a conventional way, but compared to Evangeline's quiet grace and intelligence, she seemed almost garish to his eyes. To each his own. "I suppose," Jasper said diplomatically. Samuel Fletcher joined the group looking puzzled. "I have to say, Jasper, you surprised me tonight. When I mentioned Evangeline earlier, I thought you'd understand she wasn't exactly the type to catch a man's eye." "Maybe. I see things differently than most folks," Jasper replied. "Maybe you need spectacles," Preston said with a harsh laugh. "That girl's about as exciting as watching paint dry. And those clothes she wears looks like she's trying to disappear into the wallpaper." Jasper had heard enough. "Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure meeting you all, but I think I'll call it a night." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving the group muttering among themselves about the strange behavior of outsiders. Back in his room at the boarding house, Jasper sat by the window looking out at the now quiet Main Street. He couldn't understand how an entire town could be so blind to Evangeline's beauty and worth. Yes, she was quiet and bookish, but those weren't flaws. They were simply different qualities from what these people were used to. He found himself thinking about their brief conversation and the way her eyes had lit up when she talked about books and teaching. There was passion there, hidden beneath her reserved exterior. He wondered what had caused her to build such walls around herself, and why she seemed to accept the town's dismissive treatment as though she deserved nothing better. The next morning, Jasper woke with an unusual sense of anticipation. He had originally planned to leave Cedar Ridge after one night, but now he found himself looking forward to his afternoon visit to the dress shop. He spent the morning walking around town, getting a better feel for the place and its people. Cedar Ridge was typical of small Texas towns, hard-working folks trying to make a living from farming and ranching. The general store was well-stocked, the blacksmith was skilled, and the church was well-maintained. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and newcomers were viewed with curiosity and sometimes suspicion. As he walked past the school, he could hear a woman's voice reading aloud. Curious, he peered through the open window and saw Evangeline standing before a small group of children, a large picture book in her hands. Her entire demeanor was different from the night before, animated, confident, completely engaged with her young audience. The children were obviously enchanted by her storytelling. She used different voices for the characters, making faces and gestures that had them laughing and gasping with delight. This was the real Evangeline, Jasper realized, not the quiet, a reserved woman who sat in corners at social gatherings, but a vibrant, passionate person who came alive when doing something she loved. As he watched, one of the children asked a question about the story, and Evangeline knelt down to the child's level to answer, her face glowing with warmth and patience. The sight made something tighten in Jasper's chest, a longing he hadn't felt in years. "She's something special, isn't she?" said a voice behind him. Jasper turned to see an elderly man with a kind face and a clerical collar. "You must be the preacher," Jasper said. "Reverend Thomas Caldwell," the man confirmed, extending his hand. "And you're the visitor who caused quite a stir last night by dancing with our Evangeline." "Word travels fast in a small town," Jasper observed. "Indeed it does. I hope you won't take offense, but I feel I should warn you, Evangeline is precious to many of us here, even if they don't always show it well. She's been hurt before, and I'd hate to see it happen again." Jasper studied the Reverend's face. "What happened to her?" The older man was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "That's her story to tell if she chooses. I'll only say that she came to Cedar Ridge seeking a fresh start, and she deserves to find peace here." As they walked away from the school together, Jasper found himself more intrigued than ever by the mysterious Evangeline Hartwell. Saturday afternoon found Jasper standing outside Thornton's dress shop, his palms surprisingly damp with nervousness. Through the large front window, he could see bolts of fabric arranged on shelves, and several half-finished dresses hanging on forms. A small bell chimed as he pushed open the door, and the scent of lavender and new cloth greeted him. Adelaide Thornton looked up from where she sat behind the counter, her expression immediately becoming guarded. "Mr. McKinnon," she said coolly, "I wasn't expecting to see you quite so soon. I came for those book recommendations Miss Hartwell offered," he said, removing his hat. "I hope this isn't an inconvenient time." "Evangeline is in the back, working on Mrs. Patterson's wedding dress," Adelaide replied, her tone suggesting she found his presence highly suspicious. "I suppose you may speak with her, but please don't keep her long. We have important work to complete." Jasper nodded respectfully and followed the direction of her pointed finger toward the rear of the shop. He found Evangeline seated at a table near a window, bent over an intricate piece of beadwork. Sunlight streamed through the glass, creating highlights in her chestnut hair and illuminating the concentrated expression on her face. She looked up as he approached, and a genuine smile brightened her features. "Mr. McKinnon? I wasn't certain you would come. I'm a man of my word." Miss Hartwell, he said, struck once again by her natural beauty. In the afternoon light, her green eyes seemed even more vibrant, and he noticed tiny freckles scattered across her nose that he hadn't seen the night before. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair beside her workstation. "I've been thinking about books that might interest you. What sorts of stories do you usually enjoy?" Jasper settled into the chair, feeling oddly at home in the feminine space filled with silks and lace. "To be honest, I haven't read much beyond newspapers and practical manuals. My education was somewhat lacking in literature." "That's perfectly understandable," Evangeline said kindly. Many people find their love of reading later in life. Perhaps we should start with something adventurous. Stories of travel and exploration that might appeal to someone with your experience. As she spoke, she continued working on the delicate beadwork, her fingers moving with practiced skill. Jasper found himself mesmerized by the graceful movements of her hands and the way she seemed to lose herself in the creative process. "You're very talented," he observed, watching her attach tiny seed pearls to the fabric. "Thank you. I find handwork soothing. There's something satisfying about creating something beautiful with your own hands." She paused in her work to look at him. "I imagine you feel similarly about working with cattle and horses, taking care of living things, watching them thrive under your care." Jasper was surprised by her insight. Most people saw cattle ranching as purely business, but she understood the deeper satisfaction he found in the work. "You're very perceptive, Miss Hartwell." "Yes. There's definitely satisfaction in that kind of work. I've always believed that. Meaningful work, whether it's teaching children, creating beautiful clothes, or caring for animals, feeds something important in the human soul," she said thoughtfully. Their conversation was interrupted by Adelaide Thornton's sharp voice from the front of the shop. "Evangeline, Mrs. Peterson, is here for her fitting." "Excuse me for a moment," Evangeline said, rising gracefully from her chair. While she was gone, Jasper examined the dress she had been working on. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every bead perfectly placed, every stitch even and nearly invisible. It was clear that Evangeline took great pride in her work and had considerable skill. He could hear voices from the front of the shop, and though he didn't mean to eavesdrop, the conversation carried clearly through the thin walls. "I do hope you'll have the alterations finished by Thursday," an unfamiliar woman was saying. "My daughter's engagement party is that evening, and everything must be perfect." "Of course, Mrs. Peterson," Adelaide replied. "Evangeline is our finest seamstress. Your daughter's dress will be beautiful. I'm sure it will be. Though I must say, I was surprised to hear that Evangeline was dancing at the social last night. Martha Fletcher mentioned that some traveling man actually asked her to dance. Can you imagine?" Jasper's jaw tightened at the woman's condescending tone. "It was quite unexpected," Adelaide said stiffly. "Well, I suppose even plain girls deserve a bit of attention now and then," Mrs. Peterson continued with a laugh, "though I can't imagine what the man was thinking. Perhaps he felt sorry for her, sitting there all alone." "Perhaps," Adelaide replied, her voice growing colder. When Evangeline returned, her cheeks were slightly flushed, and Jasper realized she had heard at least part of the conversation. Her composure remained intact, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "I'm sorry for the interruption," she said quietly. Settling back into her chair, "No need to apologize," Jasper replied, wishing he could somehow shield her from such thoughtless cruelty. "You mentioned some book recommendations." Evangeline seemed grateful for the change of subject. "Yes, indeed. I was thinking you might enjoy 2 Years Before the Mast by Richard Henry Dana. It's about sea voyages, but the themes of adventure and discovery might appeal to you. There's also Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra, wonderful stories of travel in Spain." As she spoke about the books, her enthusiasm returned, and Jasper found himself drawn into her descriptions of far-off places and exciting adventures. She had a gift for making stories come alive, painting vivid pictures with her words. "You should be a teacher," he said impulsively. "You have a real talent for making things interesting." "I do teach sometimes." At the school," she said, then added more quietly, "though I don't know how much longer that will continue." "Why not?" Jasper asked, concerned by the sadness that had crept into her voice. Evangeline hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There's been talk among some of the parents that I'm unsuitable. Too bookish, they say. They worry I'm putting strange ideas into their children's heads by encouraging them to read poetry and stories about faraway places." Jasper felt anger surge through him. "That's ridiculous. Any parent should be grateful to have someone with your intelligence and passion teaching their children. You're very kind." "Mr. McKinnon, but not everyone shares your opinion," she said with a sad smile. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to live somewhere else, a bigger city, where people appreciate learning and culture. But this is my home now, and Aunt Adelaide needs my help with the shop. What if you didn't have to choose? Jasper asked quietly. What if you could find a place where you could be yourself, where people valued your intelligence and creativity? Evangeline looked at him with surprise, and for a moment, something hopeful flickered in her eyes. Then she looked down at her hands. The moment passed. I think I've learned not to dream too much about things that can't be, she said softly, before Jasper could respond. The shop door chimed again, and Preston Walsh entered with his typical swagger. His eyes immediately found Evangeline, and his expression became predatory. Well, he said with a smirk. If it isn't our visiting stranger and our resident bookworm, having another intellectual discussion, are we? Jasper stood slowly, his entire body tensing. Mr. Preston, he said evenly, I stopped by to see if Miss Evangeline might reconsider her refusal to dance with me last night, Preston continued, ignoring Jasper's obvious displeasure. After all, beggars can't be choosers, can they? The insult hung in the air like a physical presence. Evangeline's face went pale, but before she could respond, Jasper stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. I think you owe Miss Hartwell an apology, Preston. Preston's face reddened at Jasper's challenge, and he puffed out his chest like a rooster preparing for a fight. I don't owe anyone anything, stranger. And I don't take orders from drifters who will be gone tomorrow. Then perhaps you need a lesson in manners, Jasper replied, his voice remaining calm despite the anger burning in his chest. Gentlemen. Please, Evangeline said quickly, rising from her chair. There's no need for any unpleasantness. Mr. Preston, I appreciate your invitation, but as I mentioned last evening, I'm quite content as I am. Preston's eyes narrowed as he looked between Jasper and Evangeline. I see what's happening here. The stranger's got his eye on you, hasn't he? Well, let me give you some free advice, Evangeline. Men like him don't stick around. They take what they want and move on to the next town. Jasper took another step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. You're walking a dangerous line, Preston. Am I? Preston sneered. Everyone in town knows what you are. A drifter with no roots, no future, nothing to offer a decent woman. At least when I court a lady, she knows I'll still be here tomorrow. Enough. Adelaide Thornton's sharp voice cut through the tension as she appeared from the front of the shop. Mr. Preston, I'll ask you to leave my establishment immediately. We don't tolerate such behavior here. Fine by me, Preston said, adjusting his jacket. But don't say I didn't warn you all when this stranger breaks someone's heart and disappears. He strode out of the shop, the bell jangling violently behind him in the uncomfortable silence that followed. Evangeline sank back into her chair, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Adelaide Thornton stood with her arms crossed, glaring at Jasper as though the entire incident were his fault. Perhaps it would be best if you left as well, Mr. McKinnon, Adelaide said coldly. My niece has work to complete. She doesn't need any more excitement today. Jasper looked at Evangeline, hoping she would protest her aunt's dismissal, but she kept her eyes fixed on her needlework. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and missed opportunities. Of course, Jasper said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I apologize for any disturbance. He picked up his hat and moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. Miss Hartwell? About those books. ... I'll have them ready for you, she said quietly, finally looking up to meet his eyes. Perhaps you could stop by the general store tomorrow. I'll leave them with Mr. Henderson. There was something in her expression, a mixture of regret and longing that gave Jasper hope. I'll be there, he promised, after he left. Jasper walked aimlessly through the town, his mind churning with frustration and confusion. Preston's words had stung not because they were cruel, but because they contained a grain of truth. Jasper was a drifter, moving from place to place, with no permanent home or stable future. What did he have to offer a woman like Evangeline? But even as these doubts plagued him, he couldn't shake the memory of how she had looked at him during their dance, or the way her face had lit up when they talked about books and dreams. There was a connection between them, something real and powerful that went beyond mere attraction. That evening, Jasper found himself at the saloon again, nursing a whiskey and trying to sort through his thoughts. Samuel Fletcher was working behind the bar, and the place was filled with the usual crowd of local men discussing business, weather, and gossip. "Heard you had some trouble at the dress shop today," Samuel said, refilling Jasper's glass without being asked. "News travels fast." Jasper replied grimly. "Preston's been telling everyone who'll listen that you threatened him over Evangeline Hartwell." Samuel continued. "Most folks think you're either crazy or desperate to be interested in that girl." Jasper's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "What do you think, Samuel?" The bartender studied him thoughtfully. "I think you see something the rest of us don't. The question is, what are you planning to do about it?" "I don't know," Jasper admitted. "I came to this town planning to stay one night and leave. Now I can't seem to make myself right away." "Love's got a way of changing a man's plans," Samuel observed. "Course love ain't always enough. Sometimes practical considerations matter too." Before Jasper could respond, the saloon doors swung open and Reverend Caldwell entered. The preacher scanned the room until he spotted Jasper, then made his way over to the bar. "Mr. McKinnon, I wonder if I might have a word with you," the Reverend said quietly. Jasper nodded and followed the older man to a quiet corner table. Reverend Caldwell ordered coffee instead of whiskey, and his serious expression suggested this wasn't a social visit. "I heard about the incident at the dress shop today," the Reverend began. "I want to thank you for defending Evangeline's honor. But I also want to talk to you about something important." "I'm listening," Jasper said. "Evangeline hasn't told you about her past, has she?" When Jasper shook his head, the Reverend continued. "She came to Cedar Ridge 6 months ago, fleeing from a situation in Dallas. She was engaged to be married to a prominent businessman, a man her father chose for her. On the surface, it seemed like a good match. He was wealthy, established, from a good family." Jasper felt a chill run down his spine. "What happened?" "The man turned out to be controlling and cruel. He wanted a decorative wife who would entertain his guests and produce his children. But he had no interest in her mind or her dreams. When she tried to express her own opinions or interests, he became violent." The pieces began falling into place for Jasper. Evangeline's quiet demeanor, her tendency to make herself invisible, her acceptance of the townspeople's dismissive treatment, it all made sense now. She finally found the courage to break the engagement just 2 weeks before the wedding, Reverend Caldwell continued. Her family was scandalized. Her father disowned her, and Dallas society turned against her. Adelaide Thornton was the only family member who would help her. "That's why she's so afraid to hope for anything better," Jasper said, understanding flooding through him. "Exactly. She's convinced herself that she's unworthy of love and respect. When people here treat her as plain and unremarkable, part of her believes they're right." The Reverend leaned forward intently. "Mr. McKinnon, I can see that you care for her, but I need to know your intentions. That girl has been hurt enough." Jasper met the older man's eyes steadily. "My intentions are entirely honorable, Reverend. I think Evangeline Hartwell is the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and if she'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that to her, even if it means giving up your wandering ways." "Settling down in one place? I've been looking for home my whole life," Jasper said quietly. "I just never realized that home isn't a place, it's a person. If Evangeline would consent to marry me, I'd be the happiest man alive." Whether we lived in Cedar Ridge or Timbuktu, Reverend Caldwell smiled for the first time since sitting down. "Then you have my blessing, son. But winning her heart won't be easy. She's built walls around herself. It'll take patience and persistence to tear them down." "I'm not going anywhere," Jasper said with determination. "Preston was wrong about one thing. I'm not the kind of man who runs away from something worth fighting for." The next morning, Jasper was waiting outside the general store when Mr. Henderson opened for business. True to her word, Evangeline had left a small package of books with detailed notes about each one. But it was the brief letter tucked inside that made Jasper's heart race. "Dear Mr. McKinnon," it read in her elegant handwriting, "I hope these books will provide you with enjoyment during your stay in Cedar Ridge. I also hope you will forgive yesterday's unpleasantness. I'm not accustomed to having anyone defend me, and I'm afraid I didn't know how to respond appropriately. If you would care to discuss the books after you've had a chance to read them, I often take walks in the evening after supper, usually along the path by Miller's Creek. Perhaps we might encounter each other by chance. Sincerely, E. Hartwell. Jasper smiled as he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. Evangeline Hartwell was inviting him to court her in the most proper, ladylike way possible. She might be afraid to hope, but she was also brave enough to take the first small step toward happiness. That evening couldn't come fast enough. That evening, Jasper made his way to Miller's Creek as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The path wound through a grove of cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling gently in the warm breeze. The creek itself was narrow but clear, meandering peacefully through the landscape with soft, musical sounds. He didn't have to wait long. Evangeline appeared on the path, walking slowly with a book tucked under her arm. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her hair was arranged more loosely than usual, with soft waves framing her face. When she saw him, she smiled shyly and approached with careful steps. "Mr. McKinnon," she said softly. "What a pleasant coincidence to meet you here." "Indeed it is, Miss Hartwell," he replied, playing along with her proper pretense. "It's a beautiful evening for a walk." They fell into step together, walking slowly along the creek bank. For several minutes they spoke of inconsequential things, the weather, the books he'd begun reading, the peaceful setting, but gradually their conversation grew more personal and meaningful. "I want to apologize for yesterday," Evangeline said, eventually, her voice barely above a whisper. "My aunt was quite rude to you, and I should have spoken up." "There's nothing to apologize for," Jasper replied gently. "I understand that she's protective of you." "Perhaps too protective," Evangeline murmured, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, she means well, of course." They paused beside a fallen log that made a natural bench, and Jasper gestured for her to sit. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, creating a magical atmosphere that seemed to encourage honesty and openness. "Miss Hartwell," Jasper said carefully, "I hope you won't think me too forward, but I sense that you've been hurt in the past. I want you to know that not all men are the same." Evangeline's hands tightened in her lap, and for a moment Jasper thought she might flee. Instead, she took a deep breath and seemed to gather her courage. "You're very perceptive, Mr. McKinnon." "Yes, I have been. Disappointed before. I learned that it's safer to expect little from life and from people. That way you're rarely hurt by their actions. But you're also rarely happy." Jasper observed gently. "Happiness is a luxury I'm not sure I can afford," she replied with a sad smile. Jasper turned to face her fully, his expression earnest and sincere. "What if I told you that you deserve happiness? That you deserve to be cherished and respected and loved for exactly who you are?" Tears gathered in Evangeline's eyes, and she looked away quickly. "Please don't say such things. You don't really know me. I know enough," Jasper said firmly. "I know you're intelligent and kind and beautiful, both inside and out. I know you have a gift for teaching and creating beauty with your hands. You're brave enough to start over in a new place when the old one became impossible." "How did you—" she began, then stopped. "Reverend Caldwell told me about Dallas," Jasper admitted. "Not the details, just enough to help me understand why you're so reluctant to trust." Evangeline was quiet for a long time, watching the water flow past their feet. Finally, she spoke, her voice heavy with old pain. "Frederick Morrison was everything my father wanted in a son-in-law. Wealthy, connected, from an established family. I was 19 and foolish enough to believe that arranged marriages could grow into love. But Frederick didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "He controlled everything, what I wore, who I spoke to, what I was allowed to read. When I tried to express my own thoughts or interests, he would become angry. He said I was willful and needed to be taught proper obedience." Jasper's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "He hurt you, not at first. At first it was just words, criticism designed to make me doubt myself, but as the wedding approached and I became more unhappy, he became more forceful. The night I finally found the courage to break our engagement. She touched her cheek unconsciously, and Jasper understood without words what had happened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. No woman should ever be treated that way. My father said it was my fault for being too headstrong. He said Frederick was a good man who was only trying to guide me properly. When I refused to reconsider, Papa disowned me. He said I was an embarrassment to the family name. He was wrong, Jasper said with quiet conviction. Completely and utterly wrong. Evangeline looked at him with wonder as though she had never heard anyone defend her so clearly before. How can you be so certain? You barely know me. I know your heart, Jasper replied simply. I've watched you with the children at school. Seen how you light up when you talk about books and dreams. I've seen your kindness, your patience, your strength. Any man who would try to crush that spirit doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Fresh tears spilled down Evangeline's cheeks, but these were different tears. Tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain. I never expected to hear such words from anyone. Jasper reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently brushed the tears from her face. Evangeline, he said softly, using her first name for the first time. I know. This is sudden, and I know you have reasons to be cautious. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Not like the men who've hurt you. But you're a traveler, she whispered. Your life is on the road. Even if you mean what you say now, eventually you'll want to move on. I thought I would, Jasper admitted. But that was before I met you. Before I realized that I've been searching for home my whole life, and home isn't a place, it's a person. If you'll let me, I want to court you properly. I want to prove to you that you're worthy of love and respect and all the happiness in the world. Evangeline stared at him in amazement. You would give up your traveling life? For someone like me? Someone like you? Jasper repeated with gentle incredulity. Evangeline, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. You're intelligent, talented, beautiful, kind, and brave. Any man would be honored to win your heart. The people in town don't see me that way, she said quietly. Then they're fools, Jasper replied firmly, and their opinions don't matter. The only opinion that matters is yours. The question is, are you willing to take a chance on happiness? Are you willing to let someone love you the way you deserve to be loved? Evangeline was quiet for a long time, and Jasper could see the internal battle playing out on her expressive face. Fear warred with hope, caution with desire. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that held the first glimmer of real trust he had seen. I'm frightened, she admitted honestly. So am I, Jasper confessed with a smile. Love is frightening. But it's also the most wonderful thing in the world when it's real and true and mutual. Is it? She asked softly. Mutual, I mean? Jasper's heart soared at the tentative hope in her voice. More mutual than you can possibly imagine, he said earnestly. Evangeline Hartwell, I fell in love with you the moment I saw you sitting by that window, lost in your book. Every moment since then has only made me love you more. I love you too, she whispered, the words barely audible above the sound of the flowing creek. I didn't think I was capable of love anymore. But you've awakened something in me that I thought was dead. Jasper cupped her face gently in his hands, marveling at the transformation that love had brought to her features. Gone was the guarded, fearful expression she usually wore. In its place was radiance, pure, glowing happiness that made her more beautiful than ever. May I kiss you? He asked softly. She nodded, her eyes fluttering closed as he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and new beginnings. When they parted, both were breathless and smiling. So what happens now? Evangeline asked, her hands still resting trustingly in his. Now I ask your aunt for permission to court you properly, Jasper said with determination. And then, if you'll have me, I ask you to be my wife. We can build a life together wherever you'd like here in Cedar Ridge or somewhere else entirely. You would really do that? Build a new life with me? Darling, Jasper said, the endearment coming naturally. I would do anything for you. All I want is the chance to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above them, Evangeline Hartwell finally allowed herself to believe in love again. And in Jasper McKinnon, she found not just a husband, but a partner who saw her true worth and would spend his lifetime cherishing the beautiful spirit that others had overlooked. Their love story was just beginning, but it was already clear that it would be one for the ages. A tale of two souls who found in each other the home they had always been seeking.